Hi there. I'm so excited to welcome you to the Arthritis Life podcast, where we share arthritis life stories and tips for thriving with autoimmune arthritis. My name is Cheryl Crow, and I am passionate about helping people navigate real life with arthritis beyond joint pain. I've been living with rheumatoid arthritis for 20 years, and I'm also a mom, occupational therapist, video creator, support group leader, and I created the Room to Thrive self-management program. I am so excited to help you live a more empowered life with arthritis. We're going to cover everything from kitchen life hacks to navigating the healthcare system to coping with friends who just don't get it. Seriously, no topic is going to be off limits on this podcast. My interviewees and I share our honest stories of how chronic illness affects our lives. This includes discussions about mental health, sex, shame, pregnancy, body image, advocacy, self-acceptance, and so much more. You'll hear stories from all ends of the spectrum, from a person who's living in medicated remission from psoriatic arthritis to somebody living with severe mobility restrictions and severe pain from rheumatoid arthritis. You'll hear how people manage their conditions in different ways, like medications, mindfulness, movement, social support, work accommodations, and so much more. You'll also hear from rheumatology experts who just get it. We'll dive deep into the science behind chronic pain and what's the latest evidence for lifestyle changes that can help you thrive with arthritis, including exercise, sleep, nutrition, stress reduction, and more. This is your chance to sit down and chat with a friend who's been there. Ready to figure out how to manage your arthritis life? Let's get started. All right. I am so excited today to be joined by Marissa Eller. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I can't wait to delve into the topic of the day. But first, let's do a little introduction. Can you let me know, where do you live and what is your relationship to arthritis?
I'm from Hickory, North Carolina, and I've had RA for about 5 years. So I was diagnosed when I was right around 21. And then my mom also has rheumatoid arthritis, so she has had it for probably, I don't know, 10, 15 years at least. So I kind of grew up with it as a part of my life, but then it became obviously even more personally a part of my life when I was diagnosed at 21.
Well, that's the same age as I was when I was diagnosed,
Oh,
actually.
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm 42 now, so it's exactly half my life ago, which is kind of
Wow.
yeah, it's hard to wrap my head around. But yeah, I would love to hear more about your diagnosis journey. How and when did you get diagnosed? What were some of your symptoms and all that? I mean, you got diagnosed if you got diagnosed 5 years ago. Oh, it was before the pandemic. Okay. I was
Right.
trying to do the
Yeah.
math, but yeah.
I kind of it was really just before the pandemic, like the fall before the pandemic. So I was lucky to get through the worst of the, like, when you're first immunocompromised and you get sick like at the drop of a hat. I was lucky to get through the worst of that before everything happened. But I had like chronic pain my whole life basically, as long as I can remember. Um but it obviously took forever to get a diagnosis. But what happened was I actually had surgery for a completely different problem. And then I woke up and I just knew something was wrong. And like within, it probably wasn't even 2 weeks. Um, like my elbows and wrists and fingers were burning. And like growing up with a mom who had RA, I just knew what that meant. And so I got in to see the rheumatologist my mom sees, so someone trusted. So the diagnosis process as far as RA goes wasn't as bad. It was just kind of the diagnosis process of getting every individual thing figured out because, it's almost never just one thing.
100%. But I think the fact that you were having a lot of pain as a young person, even before this like big flare up, and it feels, I know it's Monday morning quarterback, but it feels frustrating that your pain wasn't identified earlier, because having a family history is like a strong
Mhm.
clue that it might be, RA. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry that your pain wasn't really, sounds like taken seriously or treated adequately prior to the massive flare up. And sometimes people who have a direct family member, it can go either way in terms of the emotional response to the diagnosis. Like I've known people who, their grandma or their mom had rheumatoid arthritis, but it was all before the time of the current medication. So then they get really, really scared. Whereas, I'm curious, what was your emotional reaction, to the diagnosis?
I sort of anticipated it just because, like, once that big flare up started, it was sort of no longer a mystery. Um, so I didn't have a huge, emotional reaction to that. I had an emotional reaction to treatment, um, because I went in expecting to be put on methotrexate because I know that's a starting point for so many people. And, I wasn't, because I'm a woman of childbearing age, my doctor didn't wanna do it. And so I felt like I had a path, and I was just being diverted completely. So that was sort of the hardest thing for me, and that actually made it into my book. She goes through the same, like, kind of experience because, my character Ivy is in this 17, 18 age where you sort of outgrow seeing a pediatric specialist and
Mhm.
have to go see, a rheumatologist, and she kind of reckons with that, she's having trouble coming to terms with the fact that this is, like, the first time she's been considered a woman in
Wow. Yeah.
this medical context, and,
Mhm.
that was also it wasn't the first time for me. I was older than her, but it was still, um, a big pivot from what I was expecting, and that was what I had the biggest emotional reaction to.
So that's so interesting because I mean, just comparing it to my experience, I was put on methotrexate at age 21. And I know that, that was 2003 though. So things do change over time, but it was well known at the time. And my doctor was just like adamant, like make sure you have, I was
Right.
on birth control and all that.
Mhm.
But it's always frustrating or it sounds like what was frustrating was that you had an idea of what was going to be a treatment for you. And because of a situation out of your control, you weren't able to take that treatment.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you put that in your book. Yeah, spoiler alert for those who just started listening and didn't listen to the title. Because actually, I do that sometimes if I'm listening to podcasts and like one podcast ends and my podcast player just
Uh-huh.
goes to the next one, and I'm like, what am I listening to? That Marissa is an author of a young adult book that we're going to be talking more about, and I think that representation is so important. I don't know if you know, actually, sorry, I should have asked you this before. I had on the podcast a few years ago now, Carol Ruth Silverstein. She wrote,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, she's,
Copy of that. Right there. Yeah.
oh yeah,
It's
there's an,
there.
yeah, for those not watching the YouTube video of this conversation on the audio format, she just showed us the beautiful bookcase behind her. You should definitely go to the Arthritis Life YouTube channel and watch the video just to see that because your bookcase is amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I loved how she represented some of the, she wasn't doing the whole inspiration porn thing where you're like,
Uh-huh.
I have juvenile arthritis, but I'm just gonna be amazing and no worries. It's like, okay, no, I'm grumpy about it. And I loved that representation. So
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So because you weren't put on methotrexate, what were you put on if you are open to sharing your treatment journey?
Um, it was sulfasalazine first,
Mm-hmm.
and then, Plaquenil,
Okay. Yeah.
which luckily it was before the pandemic, before the whole, Plaquenil
Shortage. Yeah.
shortage and everything. And I did not last long on those 2 medications. I had really bad side effects. So
Mhm.
I was on Humira as my first, like, biologic,
Mm,
um, and that was probably within, like, the first couple of months after
nice.
I was diagnosed, and I was on that for probably at least 2 years, like, through the worst of the pandemic, that was what I was on.
Mhm. And, um, and has it been working?
It worked for a while, and then I went on kind of a journey of trying to find something else that would work.
Mhm.
So I'm on Simzia now, and it works really well. It has been for a while.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and we were just in my Room to Thrive support group yesterday. It came up this idea of like it's really hard to know what to do when your medication is like it's working partially. You're like, I
Yeah,
don't feel as bad as I did during my worst flare, but I don't feel as good as I did before my diagnosis. Like, do I settle?
yeah,
Like, how did you do I settle for they call it like, a mild to moderate disease activity or partially controlled RA
yeah.
versus shooting for like full control. How did you end up how did you navigate that?
Um, I think it's about kind of knowing what your baseline is, like
Mm,
what you can tolerate as far as disease activity and fatigue and everything before it's like truly interrupting your life and you're having flare-ups more often than not.
yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes I would be hesitant to switch medications because I don't know that it's going to be better. It might be worse.
Yep.
You have like prior authorizations, and sometimes you have to be off meds for a while just
Mhm.
because of the whole like administrative mess. So sometimes I definitely would, like with Humira, I stuck to it probably longer than I should have, just because I didn't want to go through the whole mess again.
Yeah, it's so complicated. Even if there weren't the insurance barriers, for me, it's complicated. Like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Like if my one med's working, then I don't want to risk trying a new med that might be better, but might be significantly worse. Although my rheumatologist and I had a conversation where she brought up a good point. She said, well, if you're noticing like a prolonged pattern of even if it's a slow deterioration, like you're slowly but consistently getting worse stiffness, worse swelling. She's like, that kind of means the fire of inflammation is starting and better to put it out when it's small to medium versus waiting till it's really bad. Because then when you start the next med, you're in a worse, position. So yeah, that's always, a complicated thing. And these are the kind of things that people feel alone navigating. But when we have representation through either, television, movies, books, podcasts, it helps people feel like, oh, I thought that was just me. Like I was just failing to do this. So I'm so excited to learn more about what is it like to be an author, a writer while living with rheumatoid arthritis. And I have like 25 questions, but let's just start there. How did you start, delving into this world?
Um, to start with, the two, like writing and being chronically ill, were really separate for me at first.
Mm,
Um, but nothing I was writing up until that point really felt true to myself until I started to kind of incorporate these aspects of chronic illness into my work. Um, just because, like, especially with young adult, when you're in first person, like this deep POV, and you're in this fictional someone's head, it's like I don't know how to be, not thinking about pain and fatigue and managing all that. Um, so they just sort of have to be thinking about it too.
yeah, that's so and I meant to ask earlier, did you study writing in college or like how did did
I
you
did.
always love writing as a kid? Yeah.
I did. Yeah, I have always really loved writing. I was an English major in college. And then I did my master's in writing right after
Wow.
that.
Okay.
And I've taught writing, and it's just kind of been like the center of my world.
Mhm.
Um, but like I said before, like there were certain things that I would do that I just didn't feel emotionally connected to unless they have some kind of aspect of me in it, including chronic illness.
That completely makes sense. So you mostly, it sounds like, focused on fiction, and
Mhm.
you've written a fictional book called Joined at the Joints, which we're gonna talk about more in one second. But I'm just curious, just as somebody, I also like to kind of I say it's like processing my thoughts through writing, like through journal writing. in my case, more like just this is what happened today, like
Yeah.
nonfiction. But do you also do that kind of writing, private or public, or no?
I don't, because usually what happens is, whether it's intentional or not, I will take what happened to me and make it happen to someone else.
Oh, interesting.
Um, and I never remember like actively doing that. Like what I talked about with the methotrexate situation, I didn't have a plan that that was going to play into the book. It just sort of did.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I find, kind of how I process everything now. It just sort of ends up showing up in my work at some point.
I love that. No, it's reminds me a little bit of like sometimes musicians will, and this is not the same thing, but it's adjacent where it's like they'll inadvertently use like a tune or a theme from a song like from their childhood or something, like it turns up in their other work or a phrase or something like that. So yeah, so like I would love to hear more about, your the specific book that relates to a lot of people listening right now, which is Joined at the Joints. I love that title, by the way.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. So what is give me your spiel about it, or tell me about this story.
So, it's a young adult romance novel where both the main character and the love interest have juvenile arthritis.
Mhm.
And they meet at a chronic illness support group. And they have this like meet cute where they're in this, circle of chronically ill teens, but there's someone sitting right across from them that has the same disease they do. Um, and it's just sort of beyond the romance. It's about medical self-advocacy and social anxiety, and navigating that like jump from being someone who has a pediatric disease to an adult, and how the management of that changes and how you grow through it. And then there's aspects of friendship in there as well, both inside and outside the support group. So, yeah.
I love it. Sorry if you could hear me typing. I take notes while we're talking. So I realize
You're
I've been
fine.
told before I'm a loud typer, so that's why I mute myself normally. But I mean, I just first so yeah, this is like when I got an email. I'm pretty selective about who like I want to interview on the podcast, only because I get contacted by people all the time that are like, I want to sell you my like in my mind dodgy sounding, supplement. I want to come to your
Uh-huh.
podcast and educate your audience about something that I'm like, no. But when I got the email from I think the publisher, the PR person, I was like, this is checking like all of my interest boxes, like romance, check, chronic illness, and arthritis, obviously check. Support groups. I love support groups. So showing support groups, even just representing that these sort of things people do, maybe not even just in a positive light, but in a on a I haven't read the book for those listening. I will have read it by the time this comes out. But I'm very, very excited to read it. And then medical advocacy, huge, hugely important and hugely difficult to navigate. And then friendships, social life, all that. So I think that these themes are really gonna resonate with people. I've had this kind of ongoing um debate in my own head, like what is actually more helpful to patients at the end of the day, like nonfiction, like what I kind of have done with my Room to Thrive course. It's a course. It's based on medical evidence and facts, and that's really really important. But it's also like as humans, we're storytellers. So sorry, I'm just rambling now. But like we learn, we feel less alone, and we feel more empowered when we see stories of people who are going through what we've gone through. So anyway, but back to your specific story. So, you know, in general, like what what do you think is the state of the union right now when it comes to disability representation in like young adult novels? Is it great? Lots of options or
There are lots of options that have come out in the past, 2, 3 years.
Mhm.
Like this entire shelf is disability rep.
That's amazing.
So I am in a group of disabled kidlit writers on Facebook.
Wait, what
Um,
is kid lit for those who don't know?
oh, sorry, children's literature.
Yeah,
So
no, it's okay. I know,
any
but yeah.
kind of like picture books all the way up to young adult literature, so books for teenagers. And there are a lot like there's also a group of we're called 2024 debuts, everyone who's putting out a debut novel this year.
Nice.
And I
Yeah.
can, think of so many people who have disability representation in their books. Um, Not even just limited to arthritis, but 100 different chronic illnesses and disabilities. So it really um has grown so much over the past few years. And I'm excited to be a part of it and also continue to see it grow.
Yeah, because I can tell you I was a very, very avid reader growing up in the 80s and 90s. And I actually was really obsessed with Helen Keller, and I read a bunch of books about her, but it was very much the one narrative of like the inspirational person with a disability. There wasn't really a lot of representation about the true like ups and downs and seeing someone as like a full, person with who makes mistakes and who yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
and yeah,
I
go on.
feel like besides the like inspirational narratives, there are also ones that are just sad for the purpose of being sad. Like one of
Mm,
the main characters die of, some illness or something. There was a big trend of that like subgenre a few years ago. And I think if I'm honest, I think it inspired this like new wave
mhm.
of disability representation because we were all just mad. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that the only time we would see any kind of illness in, a book like that, went viral or hit the New York Times bestseller list or whatever were those narratives that were just um sad for the sake of being sad.
Yeah. I've seen a little of that debate, which definitely makes sense. I really liked The Fault in Our Stars by John Green, which I know some people kind of put in that category. I I think he's just a great writer, but my favorite book of his is, if I don't know if you've read it, but Turtles All the Way Down,
Mhm.
and he has OCD in that book, the character who has
Yeah.
OCD, and, it really captured that to me, I guess, but yeah, you're right, it's like, what is the purpose of the representation? Is it just to make you other the person with a chronic illness and be like, it's so sad, and then they died. Like, what's the point? Like
Exactly, yeah.
people do die, like, people die of illnesses. Like that's something that can be, their stories are important about that. I read, sorry, this is in the nonfiction, but what's his name? I always want to say the wrong name. He had a child that died. He's an actor that had a child that died from cancer. And A Heart That Works by Rob Delaney. A heart that works is a heart. The longer quote is, a heart that works is a heart that hurts.
Oh,
Um, yeah, and that's a really good I mean, it's you can't argue with what it is. It's a true, nonfiction story about how their family navigated pediatric, fatal cancer with their middle child. But anyway, okay, sorry. Back to your story. Back to your story. This is how my brain works. I'm just going on every place. Um, and so how like if someone who's maybe someone listening here who's like, I've always wanted to write a book. How do you recommend getting started?
well, they say write what you know,
Mhm,
and that really does resonate with me because, like I said, I wrote, 100 different things that had nothing to do with me, and they
mhm.
just felt impersonal and like they belonged to someone else. So
Interesting.
I'm always a person that starts with a character, um, rather than a plot. Like, um, I'm not like a fantasy writer who can tell you about this like incredible world that they've built. It's like I just sort of make someone up and put them in my
Yeah,
world.
yeah, yeah.
Um, So I don't know how to do the reverse because it's a kind of debate in like writers communities what you start with, the plot or the character. But
Hmm.
I think if you want to write a book, you have to decide which you are. Like when you think I want to write a book, what are you seeing in your mind? Are you seeing the plot itself or are you seeing this character that you want to build? And then
Oh,
just focus on that and kind of let it take over.
that's so I never even thought of that. Like, do you start with yeah, I always assumed the fantasy people started with like this world, like because sometimes the fantasy books even have like a map when you
Yeah.
read them. But that yeah, doesn't mean that they started with it. They could have just started with the character. Um, and yeah, I think the whole writing process seems really magical to me from what I've never really tried in any sort of consistent way to write fiction, but it's since like college 20 years ago. But I have heard that it's almost like what do people say? Like it's like the character is like you're the funnel, you as the author are the
Yeah.
funnel through which the character does things. It's
Mhm.
so like what does that feel like? Does it feel like magic?
Yeah, to me it does. Yeah. That's what I've like one thing that I've had to do is separate writing from publishing
Mm,
because they're two different writing is an art, publishing is a business.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Oh, I
so
love that. Yeah.
writing still feels like magic to me, and I've told myself, like, if it ever gets to the point where it doesn't, that's when I have to stop, because it's been such a, like, source of therapy for me and a source of expression, and I don't wanna lose the, like, catharsis of writing in the kind of admittedly messy world of publishing.
If you have ever felt completely lost or utterly alone while trying to navigate real life with rheumatic disease, listen up. I am here for you. I created an educational program to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. And it's called Room to Thrive. After earning a master's in occupational therapy and completing hundreds of hours of additional training, I created a step-by-step guide to help you truly thrive with rheumatic disease. This is the only program I know of that's designed to improve quality of life for people living with inflammatory, autoimmune forms of arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, Sjogren's disease, and more. During the self-paced lessons, you'll learn how to manage pain and fatigue, cope with stress, navigate relationships, and continue doing the things that matter to you and bring you joy. The goal is really to help you improve your quality of life and learn how to thrive with your rheumatic disease right now, rather than waiting for a distant day when it might be cured or healed. I really created the down-to-earth, practical, heartfelt resource I wish I had had when I was first diagnosed at age 20. If you want even more in-depth support, you can join the 12-week Room to Thrive virtual support group, where you'll be surrounded by people who actually get what you're going through, people who will provide the encouragement, validation, and support that you deserve. Each group is expertly moderated, so you don't have to worry about the kind of misinformation that spreads like wildfire in the free-for-all social media groups. If you're on the fence, don't just take my word for it. Here's what Katie had to say in March 2023. I was lost and overwhelmed with my RA diagnosis. It felt overwhelming to know what to read, what to do, how to spend my energy trying to research on the internet. Room to Thrive did that for me. It's been like getting a crash course in my diagnosis along with a community who gets it. To see all the details, including the dates for the next support groups, go to the link in the show notes or bit.ly/thrive room with a capital T and capital R. You can also just email me anytime at info@myarthritislife.net. And don't delay if you're interested, because each group is capped at 16 people or less in order to make a small, intimate group atmosphere. Thanks so much for your time, and I can't wait to get started with the next groups. And I can't wait for those of you who are interested in the self-paced option to go ahead and join that at any time. Bye-bye for now. Oh my gosh, that's such an important thing to think of. Yeah, to separate. Again, you're saying things I never thought of. I'm definitely one of those people, just for the record, I'm one of those people that has like a dream of like one day I want to write a book too. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I get to the point in my life where I'm like, okay, it's kind of one day, like you're 42 now, you got to get on this. But so I've been and I actually the other thing that really was perfect timing with your book coming, and me getting to know you and your book is that I recently earlier this year joined a uh radical romance book club here in Seattle, a Third
I
Place
love
Books. And yeah, the idea of radical romance is about, as defined by them, is like representation of historically underrepresented groups in romance. So whether that's, different, multiracial couples, people in different countries or backgrounds from the standard American, story, and included just the way I heard about it was they were doing Chloe Lisa's book,
Yeah.
Always Only You, and the main character has rheumatoid arthritis, and I fell in love with that book, and I read the whole series, the Bergman brothers, and so um it's just been and I realized that I had a knee-jerk reaction against romance novels, even though I'm like totally like a serial monogamist, like before I met my husband, like love being in a relationship, love, like watch love movies and love stories, rom-coms. But when it came to reading, I think it's because I grew up when it was like romance novels were just associated with like books with this cover of like Fabio on them.
Yeah.
And they weren't really any like I realized when I started reading them, like, oh, these are just the majority of the book. Now, this is adult, romance, but the majority of the book is the complex interhuman dynamics
Hmm.
of loving someone. And then, like, again, for the adult ones, it's like, and then there's some steamy scenes, that are really fun to read. But like that's anyway. So I've really transformed my understanding of what romance is. But can you tell people who are listening, what's the difference between like an adult romance versus a young adult romance and young
Oh,
adult genre?
anything young adult needs to be written for teens.
Hmm.
Um, so you have to weigh like keeping it appropriate for a teenage audience, even though, teenagers like they'll watch and see stuff much worse than what's in any book. But
Yeah.
especially with book banning happening across
Mhm.
America for, ridiculous things like someone swears once and now that book can't live in the library anymore.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yeah.
So
So
frustrating.
the balance is typically um and it's up to the author and the publisher too. But the balance is keeping everything appropriate for a teenage audience and making sure that you are centering your teenage audience and
Mm,
not writing YA for adults, which is kind of a thing that's happened. Like you think of really popular YA romances and you can sometimes question if they were written for a teenage audience or if they were written for the adult audience in mind.
do you mean like when they write for the adult audience, is it for like to teach the kids that they should follow the rules actually, or something like that? Or
No, I think it's just um writing for the adult audience can kind of be um just making it appeal to adults more than it appeals to teens.
mm-hmm.
Um and it's difficult to balance, especially with as many adults as are reading YA right now, which is great. Like, don't get me wrong. I love, I mean, I'm an adult who reads YA, but you always want to make sure as an author that you are keeping your focus on your ideal audience.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
that's always in YA for me going to be for teens.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so like that. I joke. I feel like the mom in the original Mean Girls, like Amy Poehler, who's like, "Hey, girls, like, what's
Yeah.
up?" Like, I love reading YA. I like. Well, I think I always say it's because I had like, or I mean, I just intrinsically like it, but also, I had a good experience in high school. I like reliving my glory days, and
Yeah,
reliving, some of those dynamics. They just don't change when you get older. You just get better at coping, you know.
exactly.
But But yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I realize I've been going in all these directions, but I want to go back to the specifics of the joint at the joints, the story. Is there anything like if someone's listening now who like, oh my gosh, I haven't read a book, and this always blows my mind when there's the statistics like 70% of Americans haven't read a book this year or something.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who might be like, I don't know, I'm on the fence. Like, I don't know. That's kind of maybe that's too much. That's a hard question to answer, but
No, I mean, I would say that a lot of people who haven't read, a book in however long, I would say YA is a good place to start
mm,
because it's faster paced than
okay.
a lot of adult books. They're shorter usually than adult books because we say that like as soon as they open the book with teenagers, you have one page. Like, and you have one page to hook their attention or they're putting it back.
Yeah.
But with adults, they're gonna read one chapter or, they have a little bit more patience with, um, when it starts to get interesting or whatever. But
Mhm.
with our, like, audience in mind who needs to be hooked right off the bat, that makes it easier for, people who don't tend to enjoy reading to enjoy reading. And then
Mhm.
also in books in other formats like audiobooks, or
Oh, yeah.
ebooks if it's easier to read on a phone or a Kindle or something like that, um, is a good way to get back into reading.
Those I thought you got well, I already was convinced, but those are great points, and I'm gonna brag for you, there's on the back of the book, I got, like, an advanced copy, so I'm very special, it one of the reviews says, "Joined at the Joints is full of heart, showcasing the importance of love and community. Marissa Eller serves up a sweet and affirming story that embraces the unpredictability of chronic illness." That's from Anna Anna or Anna Sortino, award-winning author of Give Me a Sign and On the Bright Side. And those who've listened to the podcast before know that this is one of my favorite things to unpack, or I mean, least favorite things to experience, but favorite things to discuss, which is unpredictability. I really love that she called that out in the well, first of all, obviously it's a great review saying it's a good book. But also, so can you tell me how does unpredictability play into this story?
Yeah, so that was one thing that I did intentionally. It wasn't one of those things that kind of just happened because I wanted this like um chronic illness flare up at some point in the book to feel to a reader who hasn't experienced like a huge plot twist.
Mhm.
But to someone who experiences it, once a month or whatever, they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I was expecting that at some point." But
Yeah.
you didn't know it was gonna be at the next chapter. Just like in real life, we're all kind of expecting some horrific flare up to happen at some point, but we don't know if it's gonna be tomorrow. Um, so I wanted it to feel abrupt and feel like the story was taking a turn if you were a reader who hadn't experienced anything similar. But I also wanted readers who have experienced chronic illness to kind of anticipate it just a little bit.
That's so great. I think I was just remembering my high school English teacher saying show don't tell. Like it's
Mhm.
one thing to I know you know this all, but for people listening, it's like, it's one thing to like tell your friend like, "Hey, my flare-ups are unpredictable. Sometimes I don't know if I did everything right the day before and I wake up the next day feeling bad." It's another thing to show that through a story and just feel that emotion of when that happens. It's not just like "Oh, yes, flare-ups are unpredictable." It's like, "Oh, I had this hope and this dream and expectation of what was gonna happen, and now it's, like, been completely" what's the word? "Stymied," by this thing out of my control, and is that something, like, in your experience having had RA for 5 years now, how have you coped with that unpredictabilities?
Um, that is one one thing that I'm bad at because I like to plan
Mhm.
and there are some things that you just can't. Like you wake up one morning and you can't get out of bed and I've learned to cope with it physically much better than I have, like, mentally and emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
especially if I have to, like, break plans with someone or call out sick from work or something like that. There's always, like, a huge sense of guilt,
Yeah, yeah.
even though, it's not something I could have prevented. It's not something I could have planned better for. It's just a thing that happens. And
Yeah.
that was a difficult thing to balance for me with the book because I wanted her to kind of feel some of that guilt because I think we all do, but
Yes.
also not overly beat herself up about
Mhm.
it because I don't want like a teenage reader who's going through the same thing to read this and think, should I be harder on myself for missing out on things because I have a flare up, you know? So it is difficult to balance the like reality with being overly negative, if that makes sense.
Yes. a hundred
Um,
percent. Yeah.
and I think that that's why it ended up being such a like soft romance.
Mhm.
It's like just very sweet and wholesome on the romance side because they both have this same illness and they find commonality in that. And anytime, she's beating herself up about missing out on something, he knows exactly how that is because he's done it before too. It happens all the time.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, it's like everyone needs that person in their life, whether it's, a romantic partner or friend, coworker, that when you say I'm fine, they're gonna be like, "How are you really?" You
Yeah.
know? Like,
Mhm.
and I was just I've interviewed someone else yesterday, which this is gonna come out like the week anyway, it's gonna come out at a different time. But I talked to someone yesterday who we talked about how like with disability representation, if everyone pretends that they're doing fine all the time, and then everyone's just walking around with this collective, like, feeling bad that they're the only one feeling bad when actually everyone's feeling bad. And if we just showed it like hard on our sleeve, we would all be united in this. So, um,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. And I think um, I think it is something that, the person I talked to yesterday has alopecia, which is a very visible autoimmune condition. You have no hair. Um, Rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, they are usually, depending, not always on the severity, they are typically in these days with medications, invisible conditions or not obvious at first glance conditions. So she said the number one question people ask her is about like dating and relationships and how to still see yourself as, worthy and lovable. Was that kind of on your mind as well in writing this? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that's another reason why I wanted them to both be chronically ill and to
Mhm.
have not even just like a chronic illness community in each other,
Mhm.
but in this like support group space where everyone's kind of understood. Um,
Yeah.
and like with Ivy having social anxiety, she doesn't want to go to the support group. She has to be kind of tricked into it a little bit. Um, but it ends up being her safe space to navigate other friendships that are happening at school and how her illness is impacting those friendships.
Mhm.
So I wanted her to have kind of multiple safe spaces to go through what she's going through.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, did you ever join a support group?
I'm in a couple online support groups, and
Okay.
um, since I did kind of get diagnosed right before the pandemic, that's sort
Sure.
of all I know support group wise.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I've also always had a support group in my mom, really, because we're sort of, if I had questions about medications or something, she's always there to answer,
Yeah.
because she's been through the same thing.
Yeah, and I know that at least some of the rheumatologists I've talked to have said, like, if you have a blood relative, particularly like a sibling or parent with the same condition, it's always good to tell your doctor, because if specific, especially if one treatment worked really well for them, they might be
Mhm.
more likely to try that treatment for you. So that's just little tidbit for people listening. Um, is there anything else you want to say about the Joined at the Joints book specifically?
Um, I don't know. I feel like we've kind of covered most
Yeah.
everything.
Good, good. Yeah. I always just like to ask that because sometimes when I'm being interviewed, I'm like, oh, I have this other point that I like really wanted to make. And I,
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's good. You did a good job. So the other question before we go to the rapid fire questions, I'm just curious, I'm an occupational therapist and I always think about like the pragmatic side of things to some degree. So are there any challenges you've had, being a writer, like literally writing with like chronic illness and rheumatoid arthritis? Like, do you ever, if your hands are sore, do you ever use speech to text or do you write by hand? Like, how does that work?
Um, I do write by hand sometimes, just because I feel like it's easier on my hands and wrists. And sometimes when I'm writing for a long time, it's not my hands and wrists that bother me. It's like my neck and my shoulders, and because I've been like
Mm.
hunched over. But most of that comes from like writing not being my full-time job. So,
Mm,
like
mhm.
I get everything done I need to do in a day, and then I write, and usually it's like, 10 o'clock at night at least.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry. I'm a morning person, so I'm like,
yeah,
that's bedtime.
um, yeah, a lot of people I know have a 5 a.m. writers club where they get up before work
I
to write, and I could never do could never do that. But,
yeah.
um, that's where most of that comes from. Like, I feel like I would be fine if all I had to do in a day was get up and write. Like, I would love that. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's not, that's not how it works for most authors.
Mhm.
Um, and so I run into, um, days where I want to write and I feel like I need to write, but also, like, physically, I'm just kinda done.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mentioned the more like the mechanics because of the hand, because that's typically what's
Mhm.
affected, but there's also the systemic things like fatigue
Yeah.
that we can experience. And your full-time job is teaching writing, is that right?
It's academic consulting in writing, yeah.
Oh. So you consult the students or other academics?
I help people with their medical school applications, so all the writing that's involved. Yeah.
That's amazing. Sorry, that's so cool.
Yeah. So I help a lot of people with, um, the kind of academic writing that you have to do to get into medical school, which is a ridiculously complicated process. Um,
Oh, I just wrote a med school a med school, letter of recommendation from somebody I've worked with who has juvenile idiopathic arthritis. The stress that I felt just on
yeah.
following the labyrinthine instructions on how to
Uh-huh.
write this letter of recommendation, I can't
Yeah.
imagine the actual application. Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that that was your job. Did you start, like, your own business, or do you work for a
No,
large
I work for a consulting company, and it works out really well because I work from home and I have flexible hours.
Oh, so
So
nice. Yeah.
I can, take breaks when I need to, sleep late when I need to, all the things like that. And the best part is I don't have to tell anyone when I have to go to the doctor, like so
Yep.
many people do in their jobs. Um,
Yes. Yes. I
that's what I'm so excited about when I got this job, and for good reason.
yeah, if you can swing it, a flexible job solves so many of the challenges of the unpredictability, the flare-ups. So I think that's a beautiful example of that. Um So, okay, now it's time to get myself organized. Speaking of brain fog, no. For the rapid fire questions, do you have any uh, any kind of words of wisdom or advice for somebody listening who might have just gotten diagnosed with either, juvenile idiopathic arthritis or adult rheumatoid arthritis?
Something that my rheumatologist told me, I think during the appointment when I was diagnosed, was be patient with yourself. Like, you have to
Mm,
be patient with yourself. Um, if you're right at the point of diagnosis, your life is probably about to change, with medications and fatigue and side effects and all that. So you have to give yourself some grace. Give yourself the grace you would give someone else.
mhm.
Um, and that obviously is so much easier said than done because that's something I'm still trying to work through now, and I'm 5 years into it at this point. Um, but
I'm working on that and I'm 21 years into
yeah,
it. So, I mean, I
yeah,
think it's best to assume it's going to be a lifelong, it's like perfectionism. It's a lifelong process to retrain your brain. And yeah, I so feel you on that. Sorry, I just jumped in because I was like, I relate to you. Yeah, and it's the hardest thing to be patient. Do you have a favorite arthritis gadget or tool in your toolbox?
um, let's see. Oh, something I always have in my purse is this little med-
Oh, hold on a
not
second.
not like daily meds, but things I might need.
Oh, can you say that again? Sorry, it lagged for a second. It froze.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It
Um,
might be just on my end, but say it again just for the record.
so, something I always keep in my purse is this little, like, they call it a pocket pharmacy, and it's not like my daily meds, it's just stuff I might need while I'm out or while I'm traveling, so I don't have to take, like, 60 pill bottles. I just have to take this little thing that has, like, muscle relaxers and Zofran and all the stuff that I might need in addition to whatever I take on the daily.
I love it. And in your bio, it says that when you're not reading, writing, or helping students, you can be found thinking entirely too much about your favorite TV shows. So I'm curious, what are some of your favorite shows?
Right now, probably Bridgerton. I'm very excited for
Oh,
the
yes.
second half of season 3.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. I also like love the Food Network in general. Anything on the Food Network. Let's see. Abbott Elementary is probably my number one favorite show. I
Yeah.
just love
Yeah.
it so much. That's
Those are,
probably like most
yeah.
of I'm watching right now.
I need to remember the name of it, but I read my free recall memory is abysmal at times. I read a really cute romance about two what is it called? I'm gonna look it on my Kindle app after this. But it's in the realm of, you know, stories that represent things I haven't experienced. It's like a two Pakistani people that fall in love through, oh yeah, engaged by accident or something. It's like engaged by accident or married on accident, where they pretend to be an engaged couple so that the woman can go on this cooking competition show, because it's like a show of all. Do you know what I'm talking
Uh-huh.
about? Farah. For some reason, the name of the author came in my head. Farah, engaged by accident. Oh, Farah Heron. Okay, Farah Heron is the author's name, and the book is called Accidentally Engaged. I was so
Yeah, I
close.
have heard that. So cute.
It's so cute, and it just has to do with food. So there's a lot of food in there, and I'm gluten free, and there's a lot of like bread, and I'm like, oh, salivating. Like one day, maybe I'll eat bread again. Um, and then what about? I mean, this is a dangerous question to ask an author, but what are some of your favorite books?
Um, let's see. So my favorite books are the ones that have some sort of representation that I love. Maisie Eddings books are my favorite.
Oh, okay.
Leah Hibbert. Let's see. Um, a lot of debut authors I'm debuting with this year. Like one book from my publisher comes out today, Natalie Leaf. Um,
Okay.
let's see. Who else? Aaron Hahn. I love Serena Kaler's books. I love
Oh my gosh, you're giving me so much to read. I'm excited.
yeah,
I'm so excited. I'm adding to my list.
naming things off the top of my head.
That's awesome. Okay, I hope yeah, I need to do a book club, a chronic illness book club, because I feel like that's needed and would be so
Yeah.
fun. Do you have a favorite mantra? I mean, that saying that word very loosely, or like inspirational saying that you find yourself telling yourself, like I do, is mine's like we can do hard things.
Yeah. Um, I really just kind of repeat the like be patient with yourself often.
Mhm.
It's the thing I have to kind of tell myself most often.
Yeah.
Um, just when those like thoughts spring up. And I think it's easier because it came from someone else. So it's a little bit
Yeah,
like I'm listening, um,
I know
instead
what
of
you
just trying to
mean.
convince myself. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of times it's like easier to, or this is kind of a Jason thought, like it's easier to give someone else the advice that you need than to give it to yourself. Like I found that actually facilitating a support group. I'm like, wait, I need to do this. I'm telling someone like, be compassionate to yourself. I'm like, wait, practice what you preach, lady. Like, um, okay. And last one of the rapid fire, although this could be a long one. What does it mean to you to live a good life and thrive with rheumatoid arthritis?
um, to me, it means that I'm still doing what I love. I'm still
Mm,
able to live out my dreams. I'm still able to go out and meet with friends and see family, and it means that I'm happy day to day,
mhm.
whatever that means for anybody. Um, that even, in the worst of a flare up, I know it's just going to pass and I'm still gonna be okay.
Yeah, knowing that's gonna pass, that's so huge. And I was just talking to some people yesterday in my group that were more newly diagnosed, and I realized, yeah, the first time you have that flare up, you don't know that it's gonna
Mhm.
eventually pass.
Yeah.
Once you accrue some experience, you're like, okay, well, like it's like that you've survived 100% of your worst days.
Yep.
But it's hard to believe that when you're on, like, day 1 of your
Mhm.
worst day. You're like, "Really?
Exactly.
Am I really?" I remember my this is sorry if this is out of left field, but I remember one of my really vivid memories from, like, the week or 2 after my son was born. I really struggled postpartum in every single way you can imagine, yet was attempting to delude myself the whole time that everything was fine. So it was very I'm sure it was really fun to deal with. But, at one point, my sister was like, "I know it sounds impossible, but, like, one day and, like, and it's gonna be, like, in less than a year, your entire life is not gonna revolve around, like, feeding the baby, putting the baby to sleep, like, and I'm like, "That's not I can't imagine." Like, you're telling a fairy tale, like, unicorns are not real. This is not possible. Like, I know I trust you because 'cause you're one of the most important people in my life, and you're so smart, and you already also had she already had a baby, and so I know she knows she's been through this, but I'm like, "No, it's never." Like, I didn't believe it, you know? Oh, anyway, hashtag memories. So everyone listening, if you are postpartum, it is true. It is the rumors are true. It does get better through time. Your life doesn't remain hard in the same way as it is in the immediate postpartum period. The rumors are true. But anyway, thank you so much. It's been really, really fun talking to you, and I'm
Thank
so
you so much for
excited.
having me.
Yeah, and where can people last question, where can people find you online?
My website is just marissaeller.com,
Okay.
and I'm on Twitter at Marissa Eller, TikTok at Marissa Eller, and Instagram is at the Marissa E.
Okay. And so Marissa Eller on TikTok, I'm adding that to my little list here. And it's Marissa with one R, two S's, and then
Mhm.
Eller with two L's. Yeah.
Yep.
ELLER. So I will have all these links in the show notes, which are always on the Arthritis Life website, which
Awesome.
is, yeah, arthritis.theenthusiasticlife.com, which is theenthusiasticlife.com was the URL I created in like 2010. And I'm like, I'm so glad I did that because I like that. Anyway, but thank you so much again for coming on. I hope people do order your book. It's out July
Second,
2nd. Okay, just want to make sure. This
4 weeks from today.
Okay. Oh, yeah. And, and people should, actually, this should come out right before, so maybe it'll kinda
Awesome.
pre-order it. I know pre-orders are important for
They
authors.
are. Yes.
Yeah, so consider pre-ordering it. I highly encourage you to. Even though I got an advanced copy, I'm still gonna order it to give you those
Thank you so
do
much.
that, and then that way also, if I order it through Amazon, which I know it's not the best place, but I can then write a review. If you've ordered it, you can't write a review of something if you haven't ordered it. So I'll write a good review. I won't be one of those people that's like, there's people who are like, I started this and I didn't like it. And you're like, why did you take the time to review? You didn't even read it. I'm like, anyway. A little rant. But anyway, thank you again, and I'll see you on social media.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Arthritis Life podcast. This episode is brought to you by Room to Thrive, an educational program I created from scratch to help you go from overwhelmed to confident, supported, and connected in a matter of weeks. You can go through the pre-recorded course on your own, or you can take the course along with a support group. Learn more at the link in my show notes, or you can always go to www.myarthritislife.net. And if you like this podcast, I would be so honored if you took the time to rate and review it. I also encourage you to share it with anyone you know who might benefit from it. I also wanted to remind you that you can find full transcripts, videos, and detailed show notes with hyperlinks for each episode on my website, www.myarthritislife.net. If you have any ideas for future episodes, or if you want to share your story or wisdom on the podcast, just shoot me an email at info@myarthritislife.net. I can't wait to hear from you.